Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you, and thank you for the opportunity to give you an insight into the PHAKISA process. And a lot of people have asked those of us who've been involved in it on and off to try and explain. So this is a good way to take you through the process quite quickly. I'd like to just acknowledge the co-authors here, because this presentation is really a compilation of slides and inputs of the team that was working on the process, the core team that was working on it. And it's Ezemvelo, Sandy, our Economic Affairs Department, and DEA were the key people in this presentation. The PHAKISA process, Operation PHAKISA, is a President's Office initiative. It stemmed from the President's Office, and herein lies the opportunity, really, because it's being driven from that level. The way PHAKISA framed itself initially was that its sole purpose is to unlock the economic potential of South Africa's oceans. We have a very large EEZ, about 1 million square kilometers, and we're at the moment bidding for a much larger economic zone. So it's seen at the moment by the national government, by the Presidency's office, that this is an area of underdevelopment. Now you can just look at the text. Essentially, it aimed to implement an overarching integrated ocean governance framework for sustainable growth of the ocean economy to maximize socio-economic benefits whilst ensuring adequate ocean environmental protection within the next 5 years. I'm reading that to you because that's their words. And there's a whole lot of words that often you see in a document that government puts out. Bottom line is that there was a very big push for development of the ocean, economic development of the ocean. And then there's, from our side, a scramble to make sure that the environmental protection is in place. The 5 years is real. PHAKISA, for those of you who don't know the lingo, means hurry up, let's fast track this, get going. So that was the ethos of this program. PHAKISA essentially had a sustainable development tack to the house. The pillars are really 3 of them: ocean oil, offshore oil and gas exploration to unlock that potential, marine transport and manufacturing industries, aquaculture. Those were the main driving pillars of PHAKISA. PHAKISA happened for 6 weeks in August, September, and teams were sucked in to work on these from across all the different departments that would have any input into these. Underlying that, it was seen that environmental sustainability needed to be looked at. So PHAKISA was structured with 4 what they called labs. So 3 industry-related labs, and then 1 lab, which was the protection lab. And essentially those labs worked kind of in behind closed doors. You had to sign a confidentiality agreement so that nothing came out of it while all the debates were happening. And the labs actually operated independently and then syndicated with each other along the way during the 6 weeks. They were also then visited by the DGs and ministers 3 times during the process to present the work from the labs and get buy-in and then endorsed from them. So herein lies the opportunity. We were engaging directly with the DGs and ministers on these processes and lobbying them. I'm now this is the Ocean and Protection, the Governance and Protection Lab, and you can see all the logos at the bottom: Home Affairs, Defence, Transport. Everybody was there. And they had to be there because the President decreed and sent everybody the invitations. Now, I'm going to talk about the Ocean Governance and Protection Lab. Essentially, we had 3 areas that we were working in. 1, the integrated framework and governance. The third middle one is ocean protection itself. And on the right-hand side, you see marine spatial planning. Now, these were actually, all the challenges and issues were deliberated by the teams at the beginning, and they came up with this framework. And if you just look at the ocean protection, what was being recognized were there were challenges around enforcement, monitoring, protection of habitats, and also limited human and financial resources. So what came out of that was that the lab then proposed 10 key initiatives to achieve progress on these matters. Now, when we talk about these initiatives, it was quite a special mechanism because the idea was to tie these down to action plans that would then end up across the departments as actual time-bound deliverables that would need to be reported on. So the opportunity was there to try and lock in the right things in protection. So I'd like you to look at number 8, because the other ones I'm not going to talk too much about. There are ones for enforcement, as I said, for spatial planning, etc. But the key one that I'm going to give you insights into today is the creation of a marine protected area network. We saw this lab as a key opportunity to use it to ensure that protection went in at the same time as unlocking economic potential. And we were hard pressed to demonstrate why the protection that we were suggesting was relevant to unlocking economic potential. So we had to show that if you did that, it would mean that the environmental sustainability of those industries would be better, or there would be some benefit from them. So it was skewed slightly in that way. So what I'd like to try and give you today is the inside story around what we navigated through, information that we put on the table, and how we tried to make sure that this initiative lived. And why I say that is there was a tendency through the 6 weeks, we started off with a whole lot more initiatives, and they got snuffed out along the way by other labs or by other members of your lab if you couldn't justify or provide the correct information. So it was a real challenge to try to keep on top of it and make sure that the initiatives went forward. So the first thing we did was try to explain to our lab and the other labs the importance of the biodiversity and the ecosystem services and of our oceans. Essentially, we explained to them that we're dealing with 3 converging oceans: Southern Ocean, Atlantic, the Indian Ocean. We explained that you couldn't just protect in one place, we'd have to make sure that you were covering all those areas. Then we also considered and tried to do a kind of an inventory and a look at and explain the uses of the marine environment. We took them through the different types of uses. I'm going to just show you some of the highlights here. For example, oil and gas, which is a big driver. They were sitting in the lab next to us. In 2006, only 20% of our EEZ was already allocated as leases for exploration, oil and gas exploration. By 2014, it was actually 97%. 97% of our ocean space has got leases allocated for oil and gas exploration. And we only realized that at the lab, and it was also then was able to get all their maps, because this process also ensured that there was a sharing of data for the first time. In terms of fishing, we all know that fishing is a big driver in this country. 800,000 tons of marine organisms annually harvested, about 300 species targeted, a whole lot more impacted by bycatch, and then there's habitat disturbances. If we look at our fisheries, a lot of them are in trouble. Most of them are in trouble. If you look at the lionfish, you can see a large number of the key species collapsed, or the target species collapsed, less than 20% or 5% of the catch per unit effort. Then if we look at some of the other industries, like the trawl fishery, South Africa has a trawl fishery that uses one of the heaviest types of gear to roll along the bottom over some of the rocky areas and bounce over them so that we can go over areas that aren't just pure sand. If you look at some data, this is a very early one from Rob Corbett. Even then, trawl called cob was on the downslide, very much lower than the pristine times, and it's now kind of stabilized out at that level. The problem with trawl fisheries is they're very unselective. Even where bycatch for larger mammals, etc., have been put in. And they also, scraping the bottom, this is actually, on the left-hand side, you can see an echo sound that shows you a cold water coral clump, which occurs in these areas, and look at this that came up on the deck. So we're basically scraping the bottom of the ocean, destroying habitat. So as I said, we have a large economic zone. If we exclusive economic zone in this country, if we put over it, just overlaying simply, kind of like a cost layer, Mandy was talking about it, but you overlay them all, you can see that the whole of our ocean space has got activity happening over it. The darker areas are the areas that have got more activities happening over it, fishing or mining or anything. Let's look at that economic zone, and now let's have a look at the protection that we have in place. Well, there you go, you can see quite a lot of protection of our ocean space. And so we're feeling very comfortable in this country. In fact, and Sean Porter's here, he helped us do this data, get these numbers. Actually, at the moment, in our EEZ, mainland EEZ, 0.4% of our ocean space is in a protected area. The CBD target is 10%. We know that the biologically viable percentage should be something like 20 to 30%. So, it's very, very low, but what's even more worrying is if we compare ourselves with some of the other developing countries, the average is 5.8. So what's happening? What's happening is we have completely ignored offshore protection in this country. So then the question, now I'm just trying to walk you through the challenges and what we had to try and convey to the rest of the lab and to the other labs. The next question that came up is, yeah, well, yes, but there are lots of other mechanisms, so why MPAs? We think MPAs are a protectionist mechanism, locking things away, let's not go there. So we had to sit down and we discovered that we had to actually sit down and try and explain and develop the value of MPAs for them in our own words. And really, the literature is not very good on that. Actually, just in general, we don't explain why biodiversity is important. So one of the things that actually had resonance with the other labs was creating certainty. The mining houses actually said to us, cool, tell us where the 10% is, but tell us now, because we want to know, so that then you let us do without a whole lot of EIAs outside that 10%. Tell us now, we want certainty. So they were quite supportive in a way. We also argued that they can create jobs with marine industries, increase resilience, genetic biodiversity, all the normal things that one would say. Another one is access to new markets through eco-certification, because the hake fishery needs to actually show that it's, the trawling fishery has to show that it's leaving some parts untouched, and then they get eco-certification. And of course, we have obligations in terms of the international. So if we run through it, we tried to make softer, easier slides to show them. It's going to protect habitats and species, especially the MPAs are the only thing can do it when destruction of habitat is the issue. Mandy already showed you this picture. We can show clearly that densities of some of the fish harvested species are higher inside MPAs. But what is very important is that we've also been able to show recovery inside MPAs. So this is a Bennett and Atwood, quite an old paper, but actually showing in each of the species an increase over time once an MPA was proclaimed. But actually more important here is what the effect of that for outside areas. And this study by Atwood and Bennett was able to show by tagging fish the distribution of fish that originate and then disperse, i.e. demonstrating the spillover effect. So that's kind of giving us a clue that they're important for fisheries as well. And we've been very poor at actually demonstrating that. We kind of say we know it, but we don't demonstrate that it really does work. And this is a paper that's just come out by Sven Köhler and his colleagues, which is being talked about and being referred to in Science and Nature and other papers at the moment, because it definitively shows the increase in catch per unit effort of fish outside an established marine protected area. So we could argue in PHAKISA they are good for fisheries. You should want them. We also obviously put on the table the other aspects like tourism, etc. So we ended up defining a set of objectives for MPA protected areas. But I must say, the reason why MPAs are a good idea was something that kept being challenged right the way through the 6 weeks. We had to keep justifying. It was quite a difficult one to keep on the table. Then, as Mandy was saying, once we'd actually gotten everybody to agree, okay, there's going to be MPAs and it needs to be, we need to make sure it includes the offshore area as well. We then got into the stage, well, where must they be and how much must they be? And you know, we're going to have to be able to justify it, so we best know what we're talking about. So we did the usual thing. We put together all the criteria. We agreed that it would be systematic planning mechanisms, Mark Sand, Z-Plan, etc. And we put together a set of criteria that we felt would be relevant. And as Mandy said, we found ourselves very ready to do this exercise, which was a win. It was an opportunity to use what we've been doing over the last 10, 15 years. Basically, there are 10 existing spatial biodiversity plans in South Africa, and because the core group have all been involved in most of them, in fact, Mandy has been involved in every one of them, we basically were able to get the data right then and there and run the information and look at it right there in the lab. So we undertook to identify where the protected areas should go during the lab process. So we used, for example, the UMPA, the offshore priority areas that Mandy was talking about. We used the KZN C plan, which is Tamsin's key project. We also had data on ecosystem condition and threat status. We wanted to know where there's good ecosystem, because if you're going to put an MPA somewhere, you might as well try and put it in good areas. We looked at EBSAs, ecologically and biologically sensitive areas. They've been identified at an international level, see if we could use that as a reason. And also Kerry Sink's work looking at the trawl fishery, which is, as I said, a major impact on habitat, and looking at proposed seabed management areas that would conserve habitat and least impact on those fisheries. We also had the unlucky 13 that we had our eyes on. Essentially, these were 13 habitats that actually are either critically endangered or have no protection currently. And those we wanted to make sure we were going to include in this network. A core thing that came out of it was that there was an agreement that it had to be a network, had to be representative because of this diversity around our coast. And the coloured blocks you see now is actually what we proposed as our initial proposal in the lab. And you can see them there. They come up by congruence from all those other different 10 plans, as well as by mopping up those critical habitats. This comes to about 7% of our EEZ. What we also did in the lab is then we started developing a report that took us through each of the 21 identified MPAs and essentially explained why, and put some pictures up, why that one was important. Because now we had to then take this to oil and gas and present it to them and try to get them to buy into what we were trying to say. So Brownsbank gravels, Addo, Port Elizabeth corals, these are just names. The Tugela banks, very topical for here, also a very important area that the mining industry is eyeing out at the moment. So we did this exercise for each of the protected areas, and a big component of PHAKISA was these in-lab syndications. We were able to call representatives from other labs, aquaculture, to come and sit with us, tell us what they're thinking. We could argue with each other, try to accommodate each other right then and there. Oil and gas, maritime industry, DMR, deer, fisheries. We had a syndication with KZN stakeholders who were all invited to come in, so we had about 30 of them from different to come into the lab, and we presented to them and got their feedback. Scientific experts, we could call them in where we needed them. It was a very interesting process because they paved the way for us whenever we needed, said, well, we need to talk to that person, or we need to fly that person in. So it was actually a really interesting process to do. And then linked to this, as I said, that for me, one of the core things was that every 2 weeks, essentially all the DGs and all the ministers of those departments came in and this was presented to them and they gave their feedback. So I'm showing you this now. You probably don't see, if you have a look near Durban, that blue area, you can see how we've actually adjusted. Our initial boundary was that whole dotted area. We've now adjusted it to fit in the smaller area at the request of the mining industries, and then we've gone elsewhere to find protection for those same habitats. So there was adjustments made, but this is the end product that then lived in the process and actually was then one of the initiatives with this map up that the President Zuma announced 2.5 weeks ago. So the next thing that we were battling with, actually, we had now these are the areas, it was very difficult to talk to anybody, either the managers or the other labs, if you couldn't tell them what could or couldn't happen inside a marine protected area. And we found that we ourselves were not very clear about that. So we set out also to get an operational definition of what protected would be. And essentially what we came up with is that protected means that you would exclude any activity that could have an adverse effect on whatever feature inside that reserve, like if it's a coral reef or a bottom fish or etc., that area is being protected for, because the different protected areas have different purposes. One of them might be protecting corals, another one might be protecting reef fish, and then you wouldn't want reef fishing, but maybe you wouldn't mind if people were scuba diving in it, for example. So what we ended up doing is categorizing all the different activities we could think of in terms of green, orange, red. Green, that's okay, it's compatible, don't worry. Orange, it would have to be zoned because there's some problems with that. Red should not happen. And by the way, mining it can't happen in any marine protected area just by virtue of the Protected Areas Act. Sorry, I need water. Essentially thank you, Mandy. So essentially our last task was then to actually put forward a proposed zonation based on the features that we wanted to protect, and then present those to stakeholders and get the adjustments on that. So this is the proposed Tugela. The dark blue is to be sanctuary, and the light blue controlled area where there'd be restrictions, and the grey areas are sort of restricted where you're protecting reefs, and so there wouldn't be bottom fishing there. These are driven by the underlying habitat maps that we've got for the area and the features that we were trying to protect. So we did this for each of the protected areas. So the process there is these then become the proposals that then need to put into legal words and go into the Gazette to be coming for a full public consultation process. So what also happened during this PHAKISA process is that we actually put together a time-bound plan that has steps in it. And I don't expect you to look through all of the details here at all, but what was an interesting process for us was that by the end of the lab, we'd already prepared the draft proposals with what was considered just about sufficient consultation, scoping consultation, for us now to put this out to full consultation. So that was in lab. We are now in the 6-month period here, where we've been having some focused discussions and had some press coverage when Tamsin, I'm laughing at Tamsin because she went and presented to some of the stakeholders, and then suddenly she was all over the internet. And we had to do some damage control to explain to people exactly how the process is going to be working, because they all thought, because it's PHAKISA, we're going for this March and we're just going to put the protected areas in. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing by that February is getting everything shaped up to be published in the Government Gazette as a proposal, which will then put in place a 6-month period for public to comment on it. So we're going into a public consultation process. And then at the end of that 6 months, we'll be working with the National Department. Dia is leading on this, and with Sandy, and we'll be finalising those. And the intention is to declare in March 2016, is what's in the PHAKISA plan, is to declare those identified protected areas. Obviously, they'll be slightly adjusted based on the public consultation process, but we would obviously be trying to make sure that if we adjust boundaries, we're not losing biodiversity, and we might go for an option somewhere else. Okay. So I just wanted to let you know that there is actually this time-bound action plan, and we're pretty much on track. I think we're running about a month late at the moment. We think we're hoping that we're still going to be able to get the the first intention to declare out next March. This is actually phenomenal because we've been trying for 20 years with some of the other protected areas. So this is kind of an opportunity boost that we're hoping, if we can keep riding the wave, there will be an amazing result at the end of it. I did want to point out, though, that we've only gone for kind of 5 to 7% at the moment, and that's because that's all we know at the moment. That is, sorry, it's the wrong wording. The reason why we've only gone to 5 to 7% at the moment is because
we're certain about those areas being important. We're certain about needing to reach targets in those areas. Whereas there's a lot of the EEZ where we've never had an opportunity to do proper surveys, studies, offshore work. And we need to be sure that we're not locking up our full 10% and then later on find other areas that really need protection and are told, no, you've already met your 10%. So what was very good was that both DEER and the NRF and Treasury came to these meetings as well, but particularly the NRF and DEER have agreed jointly to put resources, ships time, and specific focused calls for research and survey that will be aimed at, by 2018, identifying other areas for protection to get to the 10%. So that was the other product that came out of this. So now, and I can probably, one of the big things that kept coming up for us is that, I've got one more slide, but one of the big things that kept coming up for us is that, well, that's all very well, but what about all these illegal activities? What's the point of having MPAs if they're not protected? Well, as I said, one of the initiatives is to improve that greatly, and I like these slides that the facilitators made for each of the labs to try and depict what was happening, basically the before and after. One of the other initiatives is trying to get the enforcement sorted out in MPAs as well. And then they did this one for our MPA initiative. Beforehand, no fish, everybody trying to do stuff in that area. Afterwards, in the open areas, fishermen catching lots of fish, the scientists very happy. I thought it was a lovely depiction of what we might want to be getting towards. So, wish us all luck, and please help now that we've given you the picture of what's going. If you've got resources, if you can help with this PHAKISA, help us chase this one along. Thank you.